whoa, things just got real because Brian Friedman, Justin Baldoni's attorney, just accused Blake Lively of witness tampering and trying to destroy evidence by making Taylor Swift delete her text messages. He also claims Blake threatened Taylor.
The document showed up in the inboxes of about 24 journalists shortly after midnight. It was an encrypted Dropbox link with no message in the body, just a subject line that read Discovery Unredacted. There was no sender name, no reply address, only the faintest digital footprint traced back to a temporary server in Reykjavik for those familiar with the world of leaks. Legal aides with ethical doubts, rival PR teams with grudges, interns in the wrong Slack chat. It had all the signs of something deliberate made to look like an accident. Reporters did what they always do when handed access but no instructions. They clicked. Inside was a folder holding several hundred pages of discovery materials related to Lively versus Baldoni et al. Most of it was routine. Template documents, deposition timetables, sworn statements, but hidden in a deeper subfolder was something else, a scanned PDF, listed as an appendix to a withdrawn motion to compel, likely overlooked during the legal back-in. Fourth, the contents were heavy and marked confidential.
A crushing defeat for Justin Baldoni. A judge threw out his entire $400 million countersuit against Blake, Ryan Reynolds, and their publicist, and dismissed the separate $250 million defamation suit against the New York Times.
But the blackouts were inconsistent, like they'd been rushed. One page showed a partly hidden subject line from an email thread dated 2023 by Sunrise. That line was already being murmured in CNN and MSNBC green room, screenshot by TikTok attorneys, broken down on Reddit forums, and echoed by verified accounts with tens of millions of followers in the satellite vans parked outside the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, their windows misted from overnight coffee and damp air. The issue wasn't whether the file was legit, it was why release it now, because while the document wasn't a classic smoking gun, by legal standards, there were no outright confessions, no bombshells. It was more like a blueprint.
Created headlines when Baldoni's now dismissed lawsuit brought up Blake Lively's friend Taylor Swift. Swift was subpoenaed when text exchanges between Baldoni and Lively were revealed to include the name Taylor. Swift's representative said she was not involved in the movie in any way beyond licensing one song for the film.
A diagram of the arsenal. It verified the presence of a stash of private messages between Blake Lively and Taylor Swift. More importantly, based on insiders familiar with the document's origin, the appendix had been submitted and then quickly pulled after defense lawyers argued that Swift's materials had already been delivered. That exchange, while officially sealed, was now informally everywhere, and it included one line that lit the media narrative like a Molotov cocktail. TS material previously provided to defendants. TS, just two initials, enough to unravel years of carefully managed celebrity sisterhood. Written in the detached tone of pre-trial proceedings, the line suggested something massive: that Taylor Swift, arguably the most image-controlled and brand-aware performer alive, had sent documents to Wayfair and Baldoni's legal team, not under court order, not as a subpoenaed outsider, but willingly ahead of time. It wasn't merely a courtroom tactic, it was in the arena of public opinion. A bold statement of loyalty, and the fallout was instant and brutal.
It's a bad day to be Justin Baldoni. Yes, word just broke that a judge has dismissed his $400 million lawsuit against Blake Lively and his $250 million lawsuit against the New York Times.
If accurate, Swift had either deliberately created distance from Lively or subtly sabotaged her. Within hours, hashtags like #Taylor's, #Blakegate, and #Friendshipple were exploding across social platforms. Fan pages that once shared birthday wishes and vacation pics were now piecing together event timelines with the intensity of true crime sleuths. Swift's song lyrics were being re-examined for hidden meanings. Lively's recent absence was reinterpreted as self-imposed exile. The internet did what it always does, jumped to the darkest conclusions. But inside the courtrooms and legal firms stretched along Wilshire Boulevard and downtown Los Angeles, the mood was more strategic than sensational. According to a former assistant U.S. attorney who analyzed the leaked file, this wasn't just a public relations disaster, it was a legal pivot point. If Swift's materials were submitted voluntarily, without legal pressure, it unlocked a door the plaintiffs had no interest in seeing opened. It shifted the entire story from alleged retaliation to calculated crisis control, and just like that, what started as a censored afterthought turned overnight into a high-stakes debate, not only about whether Blake Lively had a legitimate claim.
She doesn't release a statement in support of her, then somehow Taylor Swift's private text messages will be leaked. So this goes back to the Taylor Swift subpoena that Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds were trying to quash, right? They're saying, don't subpoena her, she has nothing to do with this, right?
But on how deep the crack really ran inside Hollywood's most carefully managed inner circle, what spilled from the leak wasn't just juicy rumor. It was calculated strategy, bargaining power, and the unwritten laws of celebrity culture. This wasn't just a security lapse, it was a betrayal typed in 12-point Times New Roman and briefly entered into public record. When the hearing picked back up 3 days later, the courtroom felt like something out of a Netflix legal thriller produced by A24. The kind where suspense buzzes under fluorescent lights and every glance feels rehearsed. Chilled air moved through vents brushing against polished concrete floors, echoing with the sound of high heels and the quiet shuffle of anxious footsteps. Paralegals moved with surgical focus, rolling carts of sealed evidence through labeled hallways, speaking in clipped legal code. The 9th floor had been sealed off with plainclothes marshals at each end, not so much for safety as for the illusion of control in a case that was rapidly spinning outside its intended bounds. At precisely 9:03 a.m., Judge Ricardo Bennett entered the courtroom. A former clerk to Sandra Day O'Connor, Bennett was known for his unemotional verdicts and a deep disdain for drama. His flat voice and refusal to engage the media only added to the mystique.
This isn't my night.
Blake took to Instagram thanking those who stood by her, adding, quote, "While the suit against me was defeated, so many don't have the resources to fight back."
You have to stop. You have to stop this.
When he struck the gavel, the courtroom went silent, not out of reverence but suspense, because this wasn't just legal proceedings. It was theater wrapped in procedure. At the counsel table, Ezra Hudson, a veteran of First Amendment battles and now lead attorney for Blake Lively, was already standing, filing a motion for a protective order. His tone was precise, polished, but layered with meaning. "We are not here," Hudson said coolly, "to put Miss Swift's private conversations on trial." There were no dramatic gasps, just a slow ripple through the back rows. The message was clear. Swift wasn't named in the case, but her presence overshadowed even the official defendants. Mara Friedman, lead counsel for the studio co-defendant and a seasoned performer in courtroom drama, rose with deliberate grace like a silk-clad cobra. "They've used Miss Swift's name in public statements," she said pointedly, eyes slicing toward the plaintiff's side. "They can't now hide her role behind claims of irrelevance." The room froze in that eerie stillness that comes right before someone's world flips on its axis. In black-letter legal terms, the question was discoverability. Whether Swift's texts, voice notes, or calendar entries mattered to Lively's retaliation lawsuit, but beyond the statutes and precedent, public perception had already shifted. The leak had transformed what began as a routine workplace grievance into a public reckoning on loyalty, silence, and the cost of celebrity ties outside. News anchors packaged it as the price of managing curated fame. Inside, legal analysts scribbled fast summaries trying to decode whether Swift's role was technically blameless but ethically explosive. Had the defense planned to use a once glamorous friendship, splashed across Vanity Fair and awards shows, as a weapon in open court?
And at the time, you slammed Baldoni's team for bringing Taylor Swift into this. How did that impact your client?
Yeah, Jake, it's no accident that they brought her into this. That they had the scenario planning document I mentioned from August of 2024.
Behind closed doors, whispers spread. Insiders close to Swift's camp maintained she never meant to undercut Blake and that her lawyers at Venable LLP were simply responding to a routine subpoena. Nothing more than a procedural reply, no agenda, no narrative, but even the faint suggestion of cooperation was enough to fracture the polished image of unshakable friendship. One seasoned entertainment attorney, who had reviewed the disputed documents under privilege, put it plainly: nothing harmful was disclosed, he said, but the symbolism hit hard. She became a background character in someone else's public downfall, and in Hollywood that alone can collapse trust to rubble by midday. Speculative headlines were spinning, #FriendshipMontreal was trending, and think pieces flooded the internet exploring the myth of celebrity loyalty in a world where branding often outweighs real connection. More court motions were scheduled for the next week, but the true trial, the one playing out in the court of public opinion, was already in full swing. Beneath the surface, the case was starting to unravel despite its media polish. While cable outlets looped B-roll of marshals seizing phones and sketch artists tried to capture a drama, no lens was allowed to film. A quiet but massive shift had taken place just days before the leak of the witness list. Lively's legal team had submitted a stipulation of dismissal with prejudice, a strategic move that dropped the case's two most emotionally loaded allegations: intentional infliction of emotional distress and negligent infliction of emotional distress.
Blake is calling this an unquestionable, vindication, victory. Like, she's just going that route, bitch. But is this an unquestionable victory for her, or does Justin still have a shot?
On paper it looked procedural. In reality it was a surgical cut. Those claims were supposed to act as the gateway for medical records, expert psych evaluations, and most importantly a deeper emotional storyline. One that could contrast Lively's polished public image with private unraveling. Without them, the case caved in on itself. The judge's pretrial decision left only garden variety. Emotional distress, intact, a legal phrase that sounds mild but carries brutal consequences. No PTSD diagnoses, no therapy records, no references to the DSM, no clinical trauma assessments. Now the emotional journey had to be told without supporting evidence. No doctors, no lab coats, not even a diagnosis to anchor the narrative. Just Lively and her testimony, and in federal court words alone, without documents, carry about as much weight as air. Legal experts flagged the move as a major warning sign. This wasn't a tactical adjustment, said Sabrina Cho, a veteran media attorney who's followed celebrity litigation for years. It was surrender. They don't have the receipts, no medical proof, no Title VII compliance. The case is like a glass skyscraper built on unzoned land, doomed to collapse. In fact, the Title VII claim, once the centerpiece of Lively's lawsuit and the magnet for public empathy, was now on the verge of being tossed out completely. Court filings confirmed what insiders had been murmuring for weeks. Lively never submitted a formal complaint to the EOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a mandatory step before filing any federal discrimination suit. One former EOC investigator didn't sugarcoat it. That's not just a mistake, it's a deal breaker. It's like suing for malpractice when you never even saw a doctor. The second that hits the judge's desk, the Title VII charge is legally finished and everything else shifts into damage control mode.
And Taylor Swift was like, what? I didn't even see It Ends With Us until like weeks after it came out. And they wrote letters to the judge basically asking him to kill the subpoena, right? And now Baldoni's team is saying, not so fast. We have a source, a very reliable source, and this source is telling us that Blake Lively is trying to do some shady-ish behind the scenes.
Behind the closed doors of her legal team's downtown office, strategy talks had reportedly shifted into crisis control. Should they press forward and risk court sanctions for baseless claims, or pivot entirely, refocusing the case as a public narrative of betrayal, broken trust, and reputational damage? Sources close to Lively claimed she hadn't been aware of the procedural blunder, assuming her previous lawyers had handled the basics. That oversight was now poised to become Exhibit A in a motion to dismiss a mistake so fundamental even casual Reddit legal followers had already picked it out from the docket filings. But this wasn't just a paperwork issue. It hit the foundation of the entire complaint, shaking confidence in how the case was built and whether it was driven by a search for justice or a play for public leverage. What had once looked like a brave pushback against industry retaliation now threatened to resemble a risky legal bluff with nothing substantial to back it up. With both emotional distress allegations gone and the Title VII claim collapsing, the lawsuit was starting to look like a house of mirrors. Shiny and dramatic but hollow at the center in the media battlefield of 2025, a celebrity lawsuit isn't just about court rulings, it's about narrative control, attention, real estate, and managing perception. What happens inside court is often overshadowed by what unfolds across headlines, viral posts, and carefully worded PR statements. And in that high-stakes arena, Blake Lively's formerly untouchable public persona, equal parts elite fashion icon, eco-aware mom, and approachable Hollywood darling, was beginning to crack under detailed public scrutiny. The shift wasn't sudden, it arrived in subtle signs: an unreturned invitation, a campaign quietly delayed, the slow erosion of industry support disguised as calendar conflicts. But when Vanity Fair quietly changed her label from confirmed to tentative on its annual Powerless cocktail party invite, the message was unmistakable.
Anytime you write something in a lawsuit, you can never get sued for defamation. And what the court is saying here is that all of the alleged defamatory statements that Lively made came from that filing. There were no other statements outside of that document.
Inside the entertainment machine, the atmosphere is tense. Brand partners have quietly activated red-level crisis protocols. An executive from a top ad agency speaking anonymously confirmed that both L'Oreal and Preserve Living, two of Lively's longest-running collaborations, have paused all campaign activity until the legal dust settles. Spring product launches for Preserve were yanked from manufacturing lines. "We don't do soft launches when the headlines are hard," the exec said bluntly. A keynote address Lively was scheduled to deliver at Cannes Lions on sustainable business and female-driven storytelling vanished from the agenda, replaced by a vague scheduling conflict just 12 hours before press kits were due. Insiders say the cancellation had nothing to do with calendars and everything to do with optics. You can't call someone a storytelling visionary when the story is in freefall. One attendee put it, then there's Taylor Swift, the cultural axis around which the celebrity narrative spins. Her silence has been both deafening and deliberate. While she hasn't made any direct statements, a cryptic Instagram story from her PR lead Tree Payne sparked a wave of speculation among fans. Not everything deserves a reaction, She wrote, and for 3 straight days that line dominated fan circles and online groups spawning endless theories. Was it about Blake, the leaked evidence, or the emotional minefield of personal loyalty tangled with legal fallout? Fans dissected everything from font choice to post timing to the order of slides. It's a soft unfollow. One crisis communications expert explained. No direct statement, just silence, steeped in plausible deniability. Meanwhile, Wayfair, the online retail giant named in the initial lawsuit, has thrown out the traditional playbook of staying quiet, opting instead for an aggressive strategy of narrative control. Their counter was immediate, coordinated, and unusually open. Legal responses were paired with op-eds, public social media messages, and even a rare direct quote from their in-house legal team.
About the larger issue, which is when a bully wins. When you stand up for yourself and you get fired, you get cheated on, you get betrayed, you get gaslit, you get accused. When you fight and you lose.
We will not allow our reputation to be sacrificed at the altar of influence, the statement declared, laced with unmistakable contempt for celebrity clout disguised as victimhood. But that kind of defiance comes with consequences in the post-#MeToo era corporate pushback against misconduct claims, even ones riddled with procedural flaws, can boomerang fast. One misplaced comment or an overly aggressive cross-examination caught out of context, and suddenly the narrative shifts. What starts as a legal defense can spiral into a full-blown PR crisis. In 2025, as legal strategist Camille Torres puts it, the courtroom is just one of many arenas. The others are Instagram, Substack, X, and TikTok, and your jury doesn't read court transcripts. They red tone. One eyebrow raise or sarcastic remark during cross can cost more than all the emotional lyrics on Lemonade. Advocacy groups have already begun mobilizing. #BelieveVictims is trending again, fueled by influencers and public figures urging followers not to confuse legal technicalities with emotional truth. Meanwhile, skeptics invoke due process and brand sabotage, pointing to missing documents and legal missteps as signs of fame being wielded like a weapon. This isn't just a lawsuit. It's reputational brinkmanship playing out in real time. Lively now risks becoming the face of that murky space where truth and influence collide, where emotional resonance clashes with hard evidence. For Swift, the gamble is quieter. How close can she stand to the flames without getting scorched? For Wayfair, the danger is existential in a digital culture where perception outruns fact. One viral soundbite, one leaked internal email could wipe out years of brand equity. The threat isn't just monetary, it's about survival in a world where being factually right matters less than looking right, and with each news cycle the focus shifts further from what actually happened to who shapes what people think happened.